Hello everybody. Alright, I'm going to continue this video series on the UAP phenomena and some of the repercussions of the NASA disclosure and the whistleblower and the independent whistleblowers talking about recovered spacecraft. Although again, spacecraft may or may not apply in all instances, okay? But let's talk about a potential drive for the metallic globes. Let me wet my whistle here. All right. So NASA says, the representative has said in front of cameras, under what may be the threat of perjury, that we have these globes, metallic spheres, that may be up to 10 feet in diameter or circumference, whatever you want to say, that are flying all over the globe, sometimes at supersonic speeds. Some of their behaviors are anomalous. First of all, spheres don't fly. So that's an anomaly in and of itself. That is not part of any known civilization on this planet. Now, there may be a crypto civilization somewhere on the planet or in the solar system that may or may not be human. We don't have to immediately jump to aliens, but we can say this is technological and it is anomalous and it is worthy of investigation because of the many consequences of its existence. Okay, so let's think about and they say there have been hundreds of these sightings across the globe. So it is not an American phenomenon, it is not a Chinese phenomenon, it is not a Russian phenomenon, it is a global phenomenon. As a matter of fact, one of the key point, master key clips that they showed is over the Mideast, and you can actually see people underneath it, and it is tracked by a military drone. And another data point is oftentimes they are spotted at around 10 to 30,000 feet. Not 10 to 30 feet, 10 to 30,000 feet, again traveling at various speeds, sometimes coming to a dead stop and then immediately moving up, down, or laterally. All right. Now, what are potential drives, engines that could do this? So, I'm going to deal with magnetic propulsion in another video. I don't know that much about magnetism, and I'm in the process of researching the different arguments, right? But I do know some basic particle physics and some basic physics and some basic atomic physics and some basic cosmology. Stuff that I think anybody that went to high school, especially high school in New Jersey, they were pretty good at this, would know. Maybe a little beyond, right? And this is based on a Society for Scientific Exploration presentation of a physicist that I've known in person, York Dobyns. York Dobyns was the chief physicist at an institution called PAIR, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. And PAIR didn't like to call itself parapsychology. But I got interested in the topic around 2004, and I went to the lab and I talked to them about things, and I volunteered my time, providing experimental data. I was a human subject on micro PK and on precognition and things like that. I participated in some trials, and I really liked a lot of what was going on at that lab, and I said, hey, can I come in? Can I read books? And I wound up becoming friends with Brenda Dunn, who has passed away, and I became friends with some of the other volunteers, test subjects, don't know what to call them, and I got to know the late Bob Yan, who pretty much ran the lab. He was, the driving force behind it, and I conversed with York Dobyns, Alyssa Hoger, and maybe a couple of people whose names I can't remember. Sorry, and it was about less than a year that I showed up regularly, and I, talked and read and asked questions and participated in both discussions and experiments. And then maybe for a couple years, I would visit now and then, and for quite a substantial bit of time, I maintained a friendship with Brenda, an occasional friendship, and I would bump into York Dobyns, who's, I don't know, how do I describe him? Gargantua brain? Big dude, big man, deep voice, thick build. At different times he's been a little round in the middle and other times not. But, a kind of guy that if he was younger and, played football or lifted weights would be a physically imposing guy, but also a very gentleman and highly intellectual. I call him Gargantua brain, okay, for a reason. York gave a presentation. I don't know how recent it is, but I think it's more like around 2017, 2018-ish, and he talked about a lot of this data. You got to realize, long before the USS Princeton and David Fravor and Lou Elizondo, this information was out there, and similar information across decades has been out there, including the globes. It is actually not new. And he said one possible drive is a neutron drive. A neutron drive. What is a neutron drive? It is a hypothetical drive where in order to produce inertia, you need some type of exhaust. So we have very inefficient inertial generators. We use a propeller, the motion of which pulls in air and then sends it in another direction, and that provides lift and drive. A little bit more efficient, we have a jet, which takes in air and injects burning jet fuel and lets it go out the back at a high velocity and high temperature. Produces a lot of exhaust, a lot of excess heat, but it also produces inertia. And then there's talk of an ion drive, which creates ionizing electron radiation and sends it in one direction, propelling the ship in another. It has possibly a slower start, but because it is possible to maintain this over a long time, a greater total velocity. Okay? You can just keep it going longer. And he said, well, an advanced nuclear technology could shoot a controlled tight beam of high velocity neutrons, and that wouldn't give an exhaust and may not even give heat. This is a potential drive, and I'm going to give several reasons why I think that is not what is happening and why we should be grateful that's why it is not what is happening. I don't have a perfect spherical object here, but let's just use this cup. Okay? Basic physics. Neutrons are, the most dense of the large subatomic particles. Electrons are very tenuous. They're more of a charge. And then you have protons, and I believe neutrons are more dense, more weighty. The most dense type of matter possible before it collapses into a black hole is neutronium, which is nothing but neutrons tightly packed. Okay, so if this was in space in 0g and I wanted to make it move this way, the neutrons would come out here and it would move this way. It would continue to move that way. If I wanted to make it curve while this is coming out, I'd have to direct some neutrons out in this direction, and it would begin to, the interaction of this forward momentum and this lateral momentum would begin to make it curve. Then I would have to use something else to make it break, slow it down, because an object at rest tends to remain at rest while an object at motion tends to remain at motion, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. If you had such technology, could that explain the rapid turns, the speeds, the stops? Potentially. I'm not saying it wouldn't. However, neutrons are not, they may be invisible to the naked eye, but they are not without consequence. They interact with matter because they are matter. So, for example, if these things appear to be made of metal, and they don't appear to have an exhaust port, and therefore they must be projecting through the metal. Even the tightest beam of neutrons would damage the metal. Okay? It would cause holes in it. And in order for something to move like this, it would either need multiple emission points for the neutron beam, or mobile neutron emitters that could be made to rotate within the structure. So that would cause rapid decay of metal, and also when matter hits matter, you generate kinetic energy which transfers into heat. They would actually, whilst in motion, have a very high infrared signature, which they appear not to. Okay? Sometimes when they're moving, they actually appear cooler than the ambient temperature on infrared. So that's one contraindication. What's another thing? Hold on. Neutrons are lethal. Okay? As a matter of fact, that's the form of radiation that is radiating from nuclear reactors that makes it so deadly. Look at that TV series Chernobyl, and you'll see how deadly this stuff is, right? That means that so many of them are near nuclear assets that they would actually cause an increased chain reaction whilst moving away from them, whilst hovering above them. And also, any form of biological life form encountering a neutron beam, birds, algae, fish, whales, shark, people, would be negatively affected, potentially killed, definitely made ill. Definitely there would be lots of cancers. And yet, you don't hear about that. You don't hear about increased rates of cancers. There are reports that were released to the public due to, I think it was Corbell and et al., perhaps, making FIFA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. I'm getting a little tongue-tied. Let me say it properly. Freedom of Information Acts, releases and requests that say that people have been injured in the presence of these UAPs, but it appears to be damage consistent with electromagnetic radiation rather than particle radiation. And remember, in order to keep 1 pound of mass stationary, you must generate enough force by whatever means to not only 1 pound of force upward, but enough to contradict the pull of gravitation, right? And the faster you move it, the more energy you need. And if that energy was released solely as tightly packed neutron beams, it would act as a neutron laser, which that would be an invisible death ray if there ever was one. And we see no evidence of that. We see it would cause material, it would actually cut metal in two. It would, if you were to take a tightly packed neutron beam and go like this across an FA-18, it would probably cut it in two. Alright? If you were to point it at an aircraft carrier or a nuclear submarine, if you were to point that at the nuclear reactor, you would probably cause a meltdown. And luckily, we don't hear about meltdowns of aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines like that. You know, and you know that that's not happening on a regular basis, because the crew members go on deployment and they come back in the same vehicle, and now they're on liberty. Okay, when I was at Naval Air Station Norfolk, we saw that stuff. And we also, I can't tell you about that. I can't tell you about certain missions we did. But we would know when nuclear assets were out and when they were back. I just don't want to talk about it. So, therefore, I contend that whatever is keeping these things aloft and is providing them with their motive fuel and propulsion, it is not a neutron drive. And we are definitely all the more safe and secure by it. Have a good night.